In February 1947, Britain sent a telegram to the U.S. State Department. For a century, Britain had guaranteed Greek and Turkish independence against Russia. But Britain was broke. The telegram said, "We're leaving. If you want to stop the Soviets, you do it." This triggered the Truman Doctrine. America replaced Britain in Greece and Turkey. It was formal acknowledgement that Britain was no longer a superpower. In 1949, Britain devalued the pound 30%, from $4.03 to $2.80. Overnight, British citizens became 30% poorer relative to the world. But the final insult was the debt itself. The Anglo-American loan was not forgiven. It was commercial debt with 2% interest. Compound interest over 60 years transformed $3.75 billion into $7.5 billion total repayment. Every year for 60 years, the British Treasury wrote checks to the U.S. Treasury. Through prosperity and crisis, through Thatcher and Blair, the payments continued. Final payment, December 29th, 2006. 60 years after victory, British taxpayers still paying for having survived World War II. But the loan payments were just the visible debt. Total wealth transfer from Britain to America, 1940 to 2006. Gold reserves liquidated, $4 billion overseas investments sold, $12 billion American vice coasts and companies, $2 billion. Lost income from sold investments, $30 billion over 60 years. Imperial preference dismantled, $200 billion in lost trade. Strategic bases leased 99 years. Incalculable loan repayment, $7.5 billion total. Approximately $30 billion in 1940s dollars. $450 billion today. And who benefited? Not the American public, specific American institutions, the investment banks that bought British assets at fire sale prices. J.P. Morgan and Chase organized the American Vice Coast sale, collecting fees on every transaction. The American corporations that captured British markets, while British factories only produced weapons. Ford, GM, GE, Standard Oil expanded globally while Britain was distracted. The American government, which acquired Caribbean bases projecting power across the Western Hemisphere for 80 years. And most importantly, the architects of Bretton Woods. In July 1944, while Britain still fought Germany, American and British negotiators met in New Hampshire to design the post-war financial system. The Americans imposed a system entrenching dollar dominance. The dollar would be the world's reserve currency. The IMF and World Bank would be in Washington, controlled by American votes. The IMF would impose structural adjustment programs on countries needing loans, forcing them to open markets to American exports and sell state assets to American buyers. Keynes fought this system. He proposed an international currency called Bancor that wouldn't favor any nation. The Americans rejected it. Keynes didn't have leverage. Britain was bankrupt. The American plan was adopted. The Bretton Woods system, the IMF and World Bank, became the mechanism by which America would do to dozens of countries what it did to Britain. Between 1946 and 2025, the IMF has imposed structural adjustment programs on over 80 countries. The pattern is identical to Britain 1940, 1947. Country faces crisis. IMF offers loan with conditions. Loan requires privatization of state assets, currency convertibility, removal of trade protections. American corporations buy privatized assets at low prices. Countries' industries can't compete with American imports. Country becomes permanently indebted. Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, Thailand, Greece, dozens more. Same playbook, same wealth transfer, same American beneficiaries. Britain helped create the system in 1944, not realizing it was the blueprint for its own dissolution. By accepting Bretton Woods, Britain legitimized the mechanism that would strip Britain and later dozens of other nations. The irony is profound. Britain defeated Nazi Germany but surrendered to American financial domination. Germany lost the war and was destroyed, then rebuilt with Marshall Plan aid that didn't have to be repaid. Britain won the war and paid for 60 years. This is the hidden history of World War II. The military history shows Allied victory. The financial history shows American acquisition of global dominance through systematic asset stripping of its closest ally. Britain emerged as a moral giant, but an economic pygmy. Britain had done the right thing, stood alone against Hitler, sacrificed everything to save Western civilization. But the price was the future. Britain sold the empire to pay for survival. The gold, investments, bases, trading system all transferred to America, not through conquest, but through contracts signed under duress. And the mechanisms established to strip Britain became standard procedure for American economic dominance for 80 years. When you hear about IMF loans with conditions attached, you're watching the 1946 Anglo-American loan reenacted. When countries are forced to privatize state industries, you're watching American Viscose reenacted. When currency crises trigger capital flight, you're watching the 1947 sterling crisis reenacted. The British experience wasn't unique. It was the template, still used today. Same debt trap, same forced asset sales. same wealth extraction, different countries being stripped by the same system created in 1944 and 1946. If this showed you that World War II's real story was financial, not military, that Britain didn't lose the war but lost its empire paying for victory, and as that the mechanism used on Britain became the IMF playbook used on 80-plus countries, subscribe. Because the next video shows which countries are being stripped right now using this exact system, which American institutions are profiting, and why $317 trillion in global debt is this mechanism operating at planetary scale. The Anglo-American loan extracted $450 billion from Britain over 60 years. The global debt system extracts $15 trillion annually from the entire world. Understanding Britain, 1940-2006, is understanding the system controlling every debtor nation today. The mechanism doesn't change, only the countries being stripped.